Dynamike is quite a balanced brawler. While it may not seem like it on the surface, a lot of work went into making him the brawler he is today. Let's take a look at how Dynamike's abilities had to be tuned to perfection and why abilities that require tuning make a brawler harder to balance. Honestly, Dynamike doesn't really need an introduction. He's one of the brawlers that you just know from the countless YouTube videos made with him. If you're a regular of the Brawl Stars community, you'd probably recognize people like Looky Bear and Pizza Soli because of his plays with this brawler. They usually make use of his star power Dyna-Jump, which allows him to jump over obstacles by using his attack or super and aiming them at his feet. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Actually, I'm not. Dyna-Jump is very relevant to the theme of timing that holds Dynamike together. And to prove this theme, we shall look into his kit. Dynamike's attack is 2 sticks of his namesake dynamite, thrown right next to each other. They explode after a second, and they are next to each other in such a way that they form 2 overlapping circles with their explosion radii. This means that hitting his attack will, more often than not, hit only 1 stick of dynamite for 1600 damage. But if you're very precise with your attacks, you can hit both sticks onto the enemy for double damage. Dynamike's super is a big bomb that destroys walls and knocks back enemies, while dealing 4,400 damage. It does, however, take a longer time to explode than his attack, at 1.3 seconds. Ironically, his attack packs more intricacy than his super, but it makes sense because at a 1.6 second reload speed, his attack is meant to be used most of the time. His super is just there to finish off kills, or start engagements, basically serving as an extra ammo slot most of the time. Now let's look deeper, in order to find the theme we're looking for. Dynamike's main attack is a throwable attack. This inherently means that the attack is harder to aim. See, unlike other styles of attack, a throwable attack can be aimed both horizontally and vertically in respect to the battleground. This is achieved by pushing the joystick out to determine how far from the brawler the attack falls, and then turning it around to determine the angle at which the attack falls. For all you math nerds out there, this is akin to a polar coordinate system, with the radius as push and the angle as the turn. This type of coordinate system can be used to describe any point on a 2-dimensional plane, aka the battlefield, making it possible to aim the attack at any point in the circle of Dynamike's pressure range. All other styles of attack, with the exception of Nanny's main attack, focus on just the angle, with their radius being predetermined as their range. It's why you hear thrower attack ranges expressed in terms of their max range, not only their range. Their range is always subject to change. Anyway, they had to give this global ability to hit shots a nerf, and so now most throwers suffer from a limited area of effect and slow attack speeds, among some common side effects. And this is the first instance of Dynamike's reliance on precision. This is made even worse by the fact that Dynamike has what basically works as a headshot mechanic. If he hits the attack real nice, he gets a double damage multiplier. This is not unlike Draco's tipper mechanic, and even that had to get balanced before release because of how small it was and how hard it was to activate. It's even worse on Dynamike, though, because of the aforementioned thrower attack. Another effect of this is the same affliction that Colt suffers from, that of a noob stomper. Check out his PowerPoint for more on that. But basically, Dynamike is balanced around the fact that his quote-unquote critical hits only happen in critical moments, or in other words, not very often. This changes when an enemy who can't dodge shots, or a noob, is against Dynamike. Being able to hit those critical shots massively increases his damage per second, and though it isn't to the same degree as Colt, it is also easier to hit critical shots with Dynamike. This means he has to be balanced very carefully, as he has the potential to be terrible and competitive and broken on ladder. The other parts of this theme relating with his attack are not too hard to discover. Something unique about Dynamike is that he only deals damage once his sticks have detonated, and that the total explosion radius is wider than it is taller. The latter isn't too big of a deal, because range can compensate for this, but his reliance on that kind of balance creates yet another important thing to tune with him. But the former is certainly more important. Dynamike doesn't really have impact damage like other throwers, and since his attack's airtime varies due to range like Barley's, it's incredibly hard to counter close-range brawlers because most of the time you just don't deal damage. This is honestly part of the reason why Dynamike in particular is usually associated negatively with Mortis within the community, and why the devs chose to address this relationship in particular with some of their animations. At least Sprout has his wall. Speaking of supers, his isn't very noteworthy, as I said. It's basically just a bigger version of one of his sticks, except with the ability to break walls and knock enemies back. The ability to break walls actually hurts Dynamike more than it helps, because he is one of the few brawlers who can innately bypass them, but he can also use it as a delete button for his teammates. Too much deleted increases his play in those scenarios, too little deleted makes him more self-reliant, and each branch lends itself to different balances that make Dynamike play very differently. What is relevant about Dynamike, however, are 2, maybe 3, unlockables that alter his playstyle. These are Dyna-Jump, his star power that lets him travel over walls, and Satchel Charge, his gadget that lets him stun enemies with his next attack. You can maybe make a case for Fidget Spinner being on this list after the numerous balances it's received, but that was honestly due to how terrible it was upon release. Let's start with Dyna-Jump first, as it's probably the worst offender. Dyna-Jump makes it so you jump in the opposite direction you aim your attack or super at. So for example, if you aimed your attack slightly to the bottom of your hitbox, you would jump to the top of the screen. If you aimed left, you jumped, right, and so on. Right away, this looks way too precise to be able to reasonably do in a pro match. It's just another thing to keep in mind between attacking the enemy and dodging their shots, and it's worse when you consider that his attacks are what deal his damage. In other words, to jump with Dynamike during a match is to sacrifice an ammo slot which could have been used to kill an extra enemy. There's also the fact that Dynamike jumps into the air. Might not seem very important at first, but consider that brawlers like Piper and El Primo have just the jump as a huge part of their super, while Dynamike can access it with just his attack. See, jumping means you are immune to all projectile-based damage, which is insanely huge for Dynamike. Since he's so frail and has such inconsistent damage, jumping actually makes sense for him sometimes as a way to avoid that kind of damage. Like, avoiding a Mandy super would be such a lifesaver for him. It's why Miko has such a slow reload speed, but Dynamike doesn't suffer from that. And since he doesn't have a slow reload speed, he can alternate jumps and attacks such that he becomes a chain brawler. Chain brawlers tend to be aggressive, using their main attack and super in tandem to take down the enemy. Take Mortis, for example, who uses his main attack and super to take down entire teams, by timing his super such that he hits multiple enemies and gets lifesteal. With chain brawlers, there are specific combos they can execute at a time, but again, it requires them to use main attacks and supers in specific combinations. Since Dynamike's super basically functions like a disruptive main attack, he can already chain without the star power, but at heavy risk of his own life. He does have a fast movement speed to help with this, along with the Fidget Spinner gadget that boosts his speed, but he gets insanely good at this with Dyna-Jump, which gives him the mobility to get up close to the enemy and chain, and the ability to survive these encounters, despite being a thrower. And again, the main thing that holds Dyna-Jump from being usable in pro play is that it's too inconsistent. But that's not the case if you're facing enemies that are weaker than you. Dynamike is already a noob stomper, but the problem gets worse when you realize pros have figured out how to consistently chain jumps with Dynamike, getting into the enemy's face and dealing damage while escaping with no health lost. And although now that's just a fact that we accept, since that skill cap with Dynamike is incredibly hard to reach, before it was the main thing holding him back. Before Dynamike's major balances, he was stuck in the F tier. He had a normal movement speed, a longer main attack explosion time, and the inability to get super back after hitting 2 enemies, among other things. We will talk particularly about the explosion time, because that's the main example of what makes tuning hard. Well, even during this time, Dynamike pros had the Dyna-Jump timing down. On the other side of the coin, regular players couldn't hit Dynamike's shots because they exploded too slowly. So then the issue was, how would the devs appease both sides of the player base? Chances are you got an answer almost immediately. Well, let's take a closer look at what the trade-offs are. Imagine yourself as the dev that has to make this choice. If you sided with the pro players, you wouldn't balance Dynamike's shot speed, while if you sided with the casual players, you would. By changing Dynamike's shot speed, you make it easier to hit shots on Dynamike, making him a more consistent brawler and boosting his place in the meta as more than just a throw pick. However, you would also be messing up the combos that Dyna-Jump pros had learned until this time. Keep in mind that the Dynamike pros aren't the same as competitive pros. One is good at the game, and the other plays against other people who are as good at the game as them. Messing with those combos means trouble, as Dyna-Jump is the only reason Dynamike has such a large fan base. Ruining them means putting many content creators out of business, angering a large part of the fan base and potentially alienating them, along with losing revenue from Dynamike skins. With this conflict in mind, it makes sense why the devs took such a long time to touch that part of his kit, even though it was the one that clearly needed the most tweaking if he ever wanted to see the light of competitive play. It might seem like such a small change on the surface. Explosion time reduction from 1.1 to 1 second in December of 2022, but Dynamike benefited greatly from the change. And Dyna-Jump was ruined for a while, but it eventually came back in December 2023 when Dyna-Jump's airtime was reduced, letting him chain infinitely in theory. Thus, both areas of the problem were fixed, but the 1-year difference really shows how much time and effort went into tuning it to perfection. The devs aren't experts on Dyna-Jump, and they couldn't really leak the balance changes early, so they had to change values and test over and over again until it worked. In fact, Adrian, the public balance developer, reported that it took him quite a while to find the exact airtime he needed for Dyna-Jump. Of course, there are other aspects of Dynamike that made him unplayable until they were changed. His fast movement speed was very welcome for chaining. For example, Dynamike is an aggressive thrower, unlike a lot of other throwers who play passively, so he needs the extra mobility to dodge and get close to enemies to hit them in that critical spot. He also needs the reload speed to be able to spam out attacks and hopefully get an enemy low, so he can finish them off. Unlike Colt, this isn't a huge problem because it only doubles damage if he hits the enemy right. And of course, let's talk about the other two gadgets. Fidget Spinner was absolutely terrible upon release, only dealing 700 damage per attack and stunning Dynamike in place. This was created back before gadgets were truly evaluated in terms of mechanical strength in real gameplay, so it makes sense. The gadget was obviously first changed to allow him to still move, but then it built upon Dynamike's aggressive style of play and let him increase his movement speed. Now, the gadget deals 2,000 damage per stick of dynamite, and it's actually pretty decent as a last-ditch effort to get damage and push the enemy back. It's nothing, of course, in comparison to his other gadget, which will be the last thing we talk about today. And what a gadget to end on. Satchel Charge makes his next attack stun enemies for 1.5 seconds, letting him immediately dump dynamite on them to kill them. The introduction of this gadget was what honestly brought him out from the F tier, and it hasn't been balanced because Dynamite relies on it to disrupt the enemy team. Of course, we all love that one enemy Dynamike that camps behind a bush until you're in range, then spams the stun and more attacks on top of it. I'm a proud believer of the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But come on, this is just too much bullying. Dynamike is regardless one of the most timing-reliant brawlers in the game, and his popularity and relevance in both the community and the competitive meta just attests to his sheer skill cap. Thanks for watching. Watch this video, or this playlist, or join the Discord server.